Welcome to RealAg Live, everybody. Really appreciate you tuning in. Hopefully you're having a great day in the field or the livestock barn, whatever you are doing. Today on RealAg Live, we've got a great discussion, really important one, I think, that is very pertinent to this year. It's important every year, but I think this year there's some things that I'm kind of concerned about that I want to make sure you get some best management practices on for sure. Now, whether you're watching on YouTube, Twitter, or Facebook, or Twitch, you can participate in the show. All you got to do is ask a question by entering it in the comment box, whether you're watching on any of those platforms, and we'll get to as many of your questions as possible. So we really do appreciate you joining in the discussion. That's all part of the whole live experience here. There's nothing else like this in the Canadian market, and the U.S. market for that matter as well, where you can participate in a live stream like this every day. Okay, today's guest, let's bring her in. It is Dr. Joy Agnew. She is with Olds College. Joy, how are you doing?
I'm great, Shaun. How are you?
I'm doing good. How's the weather up there at Olds?
It is sunny and gorgeous out, and I'm pretty sure the combine is rolling. So I need to get out of here in about half an hour.
This is research time. This is where you.
Yes.
Hey, it's harvest. That's just like a regular commercial farmer. Researchers get the fruits of their work this time of the year too.
You bet. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, we're going to talk about storage today. We're going to get to some of the things that Olds College has been working on at the back half, but I want to talk about storage. And so far across Western Canada, harvest going, I would say, much better than the past couple years. There's still a ways to go, though, for sure. Now, some of this, especially the early crop, put in the bin, very high temperature. It was hot in parts of August. When based on some of the research that you've done in the past at Olds and your former time at PAMI, what do we need to be thinking about, and how do we take care of that wheat or that canola or whatever we have in the bin when it was put in so warm?
So I guess the first thing to know is to understand that, yeah, too warm is not good. It does have to be cool in the bin, even if it is coming off the field and going to the bin dry. So there are some great resources available at the Canadian Grain Commission and on the PAMI website that provide some information about the safe storage temperature and moisture content for all the different grain types. Safe temperature is pretty uniform across all the grain types of around, I think, 15 degrees Celsius or cooler. Safe moisture contents does vary depending on the crop.
Okay, so obviously if you have a fancy technology set up where you have one of those electronic bin monitoring systems, that would be ideal.
Right.
But a lot of people don't have that. So what do they need to do to check on it?
Yeah, good question. I guess so. You know, if you don't have in-bin monitoring, you know that the grain is going into the bin pretty close to the air temperature that it came off the field that day. So if it came off the field on a hot 30-degree day, it's probably 30 degrees going into that bin. So you know it's in a high risk situation and does need to be cooled. So if you don't have in-bin monitoring, there are, I guess, some rules of thumb about the number of hours or days the fan needs to run to get it down to safe to store temperature. But really nothing beats actually knowing for sure by measuring. So if you have the in-bin cables, the dedicated cables, great. If you don't, there are various other both high-tech and low-tech options for probing the bin just to get an idea of what that temperature is.
Take a load out, like circulate kind of thing?
You could, yeah. Circulation typically isn't needed if you're just needing to cool. But we're talking, or I've heard some pretty innovative solutions about just long rebar or long sticks that they go and they'll stick in either the bin lid or the manhole just to get an idea of what that temperature is, say 2 or 3 or 4 feet into the grain mass. And that's literally just sticking in a metal rod, pulling it out and feeling it with their hand. And if it's cool, great. If it's not, leave the fans on for a little bit longer. That's obviously the low tech way and maybe not really safe. But yeah, there's also more high tech and more available, I guess,
Yeah.
temperature probes as well that aren't necessarily stuck in one bin. You can move them from bin to bin.
It's a way. The important thing here is it's a weighted check that you have
Exactly.
to, whether it's
Yeah.
low tech, high tech, you need to be checking because I don't know. Most farms have experienced this where it's like the procrastination cycle starts, right? And you kind of lose track
Yeah,
of the days or the weeks. Like, well, I'm pretty sure I checked
for
that bin
sure.
last week, and then
Yeah.
all of a sudden it's like, oh, I better do that. Oh, I'll do it tomorrow, and then all of a sudden the couple days turns into a couple weeks,
Yeah.
and you go check, and you are not happy when you do.
And harvest season is insanely busy, so it's easy to put it off, right? Because there's other things that are higher priority. And I guess that's really where the value of these higher tech solutions, I guess, are derived, is that it's that, you know, um, real time, hands off approach for bin management. You can be miles away, you can be countries away, and know exactly what's going on inside your bin with some of these higher tech solutions.
They're pretty cool. Like,
They are, yeah.
and they just get better and better and better. And when I don't know, Peter Johnson and I were talking about this one day, where I remember one time I got a quote on a system, right? This is probably like 15 years ago, and for when we had a seed farm, and I got the quote, and then when you looked at it, you're like, oh my goodness. But then you think about it, you do the math, like, well, if we lost one bin,
Yes.
we've like paid for it.
In a single year, and but these things are in your bins for 10, 15, 20 years, right? So if you think about it over the course of the number of years it's going to be, helping you monitor your bins, and consider it even as low cost insurance on that grain, then it's a no-brainer in most cases.
Yeah. Now, I find with grain storage and grain management, there's a whole bunch of what I would call like old wives' tales, right? Where it's like, well, this is what dad did or grandpa did, or I heard or somebody told me. And then you ask a follow up question, well, why of that? Nobody knows. And so,
Right.
what are some of the things that can you think of any of those? Because like I hear them like when the temperature drops a certain amount, you should turn the air off at night, or you maybe should leave the fans on at night. Like there's all these kinds of discussions that are going on. Can you address some of those?
Oh, I
Because
guess
there's
my
a
my
lot of them.
blanket, yeah, no, my blanket statement is that there is no one single solution that fits every situation. It kind of always depends on the situation. So yeah, I've heard only run your fans at night, or only run your fans during the day, or for sure turn your fans off when it's raining, or never turn your fans off because a crust will form in the grain mass and it'll disrupt airflow. And there's probably a hundred more, but those
Yeah.
are those are probably the biggest ones. And in all four of those that I just listed, there is a situation where yes, that's probably you probably shouldn't run your fans in the rain, or yeah, you probably shouldn't turn your fans off because a crust might form. But it's not always the case, and really it is a case by case situation usually.
So okay, so based on the case though, how do I know?
Monitoring.
Okay, so that's the
Yeah.
key. So
Yes.
don't think about the result. You be on the proactive, be constantly checking, and then play with the variables. Like, do I turn like in terms of when I run the fans or like that? Like, what?
It's
How do
so
I manage that?
I guess so monitoring is key, but also educating yourself on why maybe someone said you should never run your fans when it's raining, right? So it all comes down to the air's capacity to dry or cool, and your airflow rate. Those are the two critical things that drive everything about drying and cooling in the bin and formation of crusts and all of that. So understanding equilibrium moisture content, and the role that air temperature and air humidity and your grain temperature and grain moisture plays in that drying rate interaction, and then understanding your airflow and what affects your airflow rate in your bin are absolutely critical.
Now, I could be following one of those old wives' tales that I was just criticizing, but big changes in air temperature. So if we go like hot to cold or cold to warm, I'm probably
Mhm.
moving my hands in the opposite directions there. But big temperature change that can have a big impact inside the bin too.
Definitely, yes. So when cold air hits warm grain, you actually have a really good situation of high drying potential, but it's usually for a short period of time. So it's all about air's ability to hold moisture. So cold air can't hold very much water, but as soon as it hits warm grain and warms up, now it has this greater capacity to pull more water out of the grain. So cool air hitting warm grain is usually good for short-term drying.
Hmm.
The opposite, though, warm air hitting cold grain is problematic for a short period of time. Basically, you have warm air that is holding a certain amount of water but isn't full yet. It hits cool grain and its ability to hold moisture shrinks, but it's still holding some water. And in some cases, it might now be fully saturated. And if that situation happens, you might even have some rewetting of the grain when you have warm air hitting cool grain. But in both of those situations, the fast drying or the potential rewetting, it's short lived until the grain temperature equilibrates with the air temperature.
Man, I feel like the grade 10 and 11 science all over again here. And
How about that?
yeah, it's like, yeah, just, I'm gonna have to listen to this again to make sure I got it all straight.
Sure.
Um, okay. So, and I think what you just said though, too, speaks to how often we hear this statement. When I put it in the bin, it was fine.
Yes. So I think that the challenge there is that when you put it in the bin and it's cool and it's dry and you think everything's good and maybe it will be good, but grain, and depending on the grain type, is actually it's still there's still a living organism mechanism in there, still respiring, is still generating some of its own heat and its own moisture. And so you have this phenomenon called sweating and all kinds of other physiological, microbiological activity going on that can generate problem spots. So that's why monitoring is so key and just understanding some of those risks.
Yeah, I was talking to on Thursdays on RealAg Radio. We do Farmer Rapid Fire, and I cannot remember which farmer I was talking to. But we talked about how do you check on your grain that you put in the bins, and what they did was they delegated it to the truck driver, where part of their daily routine in the morning before they got started with the harvest, because especially this time of year, we're not going early in the morning on the combines, right? We were getting heavier dews, and so there's a bit of a rest period in the morning to do blow down and things like that. So what they do is they would have the truck driver, their responsibility was to pull a certain amount of samples at a certain amount of bins, to just do that check. And you kind of need to assign some of those responsibilities, otherwise everybody assumes, and we know what first three letters are in the word assume.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, that sounds a great strategy. And if you have the resource and the manpower to do that and the horsepower to do that, definitely that more diligent monitoring is a great solution.
Yeah, and just to trace back, because some people probably tuned in after we started here, how often should we be proactive on checking?
Well, so if you have a monitoring system, obviously daily or hourly or however often you can check on the app, as often as you can, basically. In terms of if you're having to go do physical sampling or you're probing the bins, I mean, with high risk grain, probably every day or couple of days,
Okay.
especially even if you have air on it. If it's, not really in a high risk temperature or high risk moisture content, probably every couple of weeks. But again, it's all about peace of mind, right? And I joked with some of the partner producers that we worked with on some of the storage projects when I was at PAMI. I don't know how they did it, because I was always stressed when we had a bin and we were monitoring real time and we had some risky situation in there. I was like kind of freaking out, and the producer was like, "Oh no, I think we're okay. We're okay for another couple of days." And I'm like, "This is like $50,000 in this bin.
Yeah.
Are you sure? Like you don't want to pull it, you don't want to return it? No, no, we're okay." So
Yeah,
I don't. Yeah, it's an amazing, yeah, it's risk management, but it's it's part of farming, I guess.
I get
So
that. Yeah. Now steel, like the corrugated flat bottoms versus some of the smooth walls, does that matter?
honestly, I don't know. We didn't do any direct comparison studies, and I'm not sure if anyone has in terms of airflow uniformity or its ability to hold moisture or temperature. I honestly don't know. The only, I guess, sort of anecdotal, but we had some data from one study at PAMI was wooden bins versus steel bins gave us some surprising results.
So wood would be better, wouldn't it?
Surprisingly, yes,
Yeah.
in certain situations.
But yeah, because there's more, like there's space between
Yeah,
the boards.
right. Yeah, so it's like it breathed better. Or in the specific instance I'm talking about, we were looking at longer term storage of canola into the summer months,
Okay.
and so it was canola that had frozen over the winter, obviously, and it was the canola in the wooden bins seemed to stay cooler for longer compared to the canola in the steel bins.
Interesting. Now, you just made me think of something too, that, there's clearly I, a higher risk period. Once we get to the following spring, when we let our guard down on some of the old crop, should we continue to check it regularly, or are we out of the risk zone?
No, absolutely still keep checking it, especially in the spring. I'd say over the winter, it might be slightly lower risk, especially if it's at a decent temperature and moisture content.
Okay.
But in the spring, as the outside temperature starts warming up and the sun starts beating on the side of the bin, you're going to have some temperature gradients in that bin, which could be problematic. So
And
definitely start keeping an eye on them in spring.
yeah, and the amount of trash we have in the sample, that probably has an impact too in terms of the amount of moisture that is being.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Because yeah, depending on the makeup of the trash, I guess, it could be, forming pockets of high moisture in that grain. And then the other problem with high trash content in grain is that it affects the airflow uniformity and the airflow resistance if you are trying to use aeration to manage temperature and moisture.
Okay. Oh, interesting stuff. And by crop type, is there certain crops that are more of a problem than others?
Yes. So the smaller the seed, basically the harder it is to blow air through it. So the harder it is to achieve the airflow rates that you really need to properly manage both temperature and moisture. And surprisingly enough, flaxseed actually, even though it's not the smallest seed, canola is smaller than flax in most cases, just the way the flax seeds stack and orient themselves in the bin just makes it extremely difficult to blow air through it.
Yeah, I was just thinking of an anecdote. We had a smooth wall bin. Sorry, we had a smooth wall bin where it had the over the winter coming into spring, it started to get that where it coated the sides of the bin. We actually had to get a company to come with a jackhammer. That's
Yeah.
how it went to. It was like concrete.
Yep. Yeah.
And 2 months earlier, or a month
It was
earlier,
fine.
it was fine.
Yep. And that's how fast it can happen. And I, again, I don't have the exact numbers on this, but I think everyone is always surprised when they find out how hot a canola bin actually got when there is heat damage. They think, oh, it must have got up to like 50 or 60 degrees Celsius. No, it was
Oh
more
no.
like 150 or 160 degrees Celsius before you actually see the damage.
Yeah, there is a great picture. I wish I probably could find it where somebody had sent me, somebody from the RealAg audience. It was in Saskatchewan where it was a steel corrugated bin, and it was one of these bins where they had them on the side of the field, and you could see the flames coming out the top.
Yeah, I have that picture here somewhere too. Yeah,
Craziness.
it was on fire.
I remember the
Yep.
farm. I won't say who the farm was, but it was yeah, that was crazy. Question here. Let's get to it. Lara wants to know, what about grain bags? Any advice on short term storage? And some of those grain bags, they can become long term very quickly.
They can, although theoretically they shouldn't, I guess. The interesting thing about grain bags is that if they're kept airtight, if you can manage to maintain an airtight seal, you can actually store high moisture content grain in those grain bags without spoilage. Because the spoilage that results in damage to grain or spoilage of grain is typically done by aerobic microorganisms or the ones that need oxygen.
Right?
And in bags, if they're airtight, then that microbial activity doesn't happen. But keeping those bags airtight is extremely challenging. So they are meant to be a temporary solution to kind of help manage the infield logistics in the fall.
It's the deer, right?
Yes, it's everything. It's deer, it's people on skidoos, it's kids out thinking they're having a good time. But yeah, all kinds of animals, birds, all of that is a risk for bags.
Man, somebody on a skidoo or a snow sled, you wouldn't want to drive into one of those grain bags.
No, that's why I think some producers even have some, methods of deterrent or just marking them so that they aren't a problem like that.
Lara says geese and raccoons.
Yes, I can see that. Bears I've heard too. Lots of wildlife pressures there.
Yeah, and what is the reason again? You sort of just explained it, so I apologize, but I just want to make sure we hit it on again for the audience. What is it about putting it in plastic that allows you to put it in a higher moisture?
So it's basically in an airtight environment. So if you can keep bins airtight, then I guess you could put high moisture grain in there for a period of time without any risk of spoilage. But it's all about it's the microbial activity and degradation that causes the spoilage of the grain. So if you can stop the microbial activity, you stop spoilage, and that microbial activity needs oxygen.
Yeah,
So if it's
because
airtight, we're good.
we've sure seen a lot more grain bags across the prairies for sure. It's way cheaper storage. There's no question about that. If you look at the cost of concrete to put bins on concrete, but a lot of farmers, when you tell them the moisture you could put some of these crops in those bags, are like, I'm not
No,
I'm not testing that theory.
no. No, although I've anecdotally I've heard a lot of guys that do, and they say, yeah, it's fine. I would. He's like, they would rather put it in a bag wet than deal with it in a bin in the fall.
Yeah, I get it. I get it for sure. So, Joy also mentioned, of course, you're at Olds College now. Olds College is doing some super cool stuff. What's all going on over there?
A little bit of everything. So basically, Olds College is converting our entire 2,000-acre farming operation into the farm of the future, which is meant to provide, unprecedented teaching and learning and demonstration and applied research opportunities related to ag tech and smart ag practices. So we just launched our new ag tech academic programming last week. So we have two cohorts of students in our new academic programming that basically have access to a 2,000-acre lab that
Hmm.
is all of our field and crop and forage land. And yeah, as of probably right now, they are out there running our John Deere combine with the on combine near infrared spectroscopy unit for real-time protein analysis of our barley coming off of that field.
Cool.
So we have the luxury of being able to adopt some of these early stage or recently commercialized technologies to test them out on our farm and understand how well they function, what kind of return on investment are we seeing on our own farm operations, how can they be improved, how can they be streamlined, how do they need to be altered to really operate well in Western Canadian conditions, and then we get to share that with the innovators and producers and everyone else in the ag stakeholder industry.
So, some of these technologies you're trialing, how close are they to commercialization? Are they just sort of like prototype ideas, or are they things where like, hey, we plan to go to market in a year. Please test this and tell us what you think. Like, where are they at in that commercialization stage?
We run the gamut. So our R&D team will work with really early stage entrepreneurs, even all the way back to helping develop, business plans, and early stage proof of concept devices and prototype devices, all the way through the entire innovation spectrum. And depending on the applicability for our farm, we will actually adopt them for our own farm operations. Those ones are typically closer to commercialization or already commercialized, where we are validating them. But yeah, we run the gamut from idea on a napkin all the way to commercialized.
That is pretty cool.
Mm,
2,000 acres.
yes,
So,
and growing actually. We'll be growing by another couple hundred acres next year.
and is that land all right beside the college then?
It is, yeah. Well, I guess a chunk of our forage land is about 30 kilometers away down by Carstairs.
Hmm. It's pretty cool. And
Yeah.
because I've seen on the when I was um, getting in contact with you for this interview, I saw some of the visuals on the website, and like if I was to take that ag tech diploma from Olds College, what would be my what am I trying to get to? Like what's my end game in terms of a career?
Great question. So my understanding, because I'm in the research world, I guess, but on the academic side, I know their goal is to graduate students with a skill set that industry is going to need 5 and 10 years from now to really, hit the nail on the head with the development of these technologies. So it's programming, it's data science, it's telematics, it's agronomy, it's plant science. It's a combination of technology and agronomy and engineering, quite honestly, is
Hmm.
what the programming is all about.
Very cool. What kind of research projects have you been working on this summer?
Holy man. How much longer do we
we
have?
can go as long as we want. I'm interested to hear what you've been doing. Lots of cool stuff going on up there.
Okay, so we are working quite heavily with the DOT platform and the autonomous equipment.
Yeah.
So we did a large number of acres seeding, spraying, and spreading this year for our farm operations and academic learning opportunities. But in terms of applied research, we're focusing on evaluating infield logistical efficiency, fuel efficiency, and labor efficiency of autonomous equipment operation versus conventional. So there's a steep learning curve, obviously, with converting or having our farm team go from operating conventional equipment to this autonomous equipment. But it was a great learning experience, and we gathered some really great information on the overall efficiency and skill set required to operate this equipment. So
So
that's a big part of what's going on.
yeah,
Yeah.
go ahead. No, go ahead.
Okay, sensors. I can't remember what the last count was, but I'm pretty sure it's close to 100 different types of sensors were out in our fields for crop, climate, and soil sensors, real-time soil sensing of temperature, and one of the sensor types was actually real-time monitoring soil nutrients as well. So really, this year we're focusing on connectivity and functionality of these sensors. And next year, we hope to kind of expand that scope and look at using that data and that information to help us make in-field management decisions throughout the growing season.
Sensors are something we hear about a lot. Is the technology improving to really help us with some of our decision making? Like where are we at? Where are we at in that cycle?
Good question, I guess. I don't have a context or framework to say whether they're improving or not, because I just sort of got thrown into this a year ago. So what I've seen in the last year is sort of my baseline.
Yeah, that's fine.
I think there's still a ways to go in terms of connectivity and the different, networks that will work in, especially in rural applications. There's also a lot of, questions or concerns about these sensors all have, a footprint in the field. So how do you manage in-field activities when you have, 10 or 15 sensors dotted throughout the field? And then you have to take them out every fall and reinstall them every spring. And there's a labor component there that is, not exactly convenient. So I think there's still a ways to go to understand the value and use of some of these sensors. But I mean, it's cool and it's interesting. And it's providing us with so much, or yet more data, I guess, more data layers for us to analyze and compare with all the other data layers we're collecting from our fields.
And Olds College, or this town of Olds, has some of the fastest internet in like anywhere.
Right.
So, rural broadband is not necessarily the big concern, but, all these technologies you're talking about, rural broadband is just so critical for this to hit the commercialization stage in the middle of
For sure.
nowhere in Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, or Ontario.
Yep. Absolutely. And we recognize that. So yeah, our fields that are located right here on our college footprint, we have great, cellular connectivity and rural broadband and all that, but we are also testing some of the local private network or LoRaWAN networks that would be more applicable in the areas that don't have that connectivity. And we're learning about those too.
It makes a difference.
Sure does.
Absolutely. Yeah. Hey, Joy, this has been a lot of fun. I really appreciate you joining us here today.
No problem. It's my pleasure.
Okay, thanks a lot to everybody that tuned in today. Really, really do appreciate it. Tomorrow on RealAg Live, we're still lining it up. We're not exactly sure who the guest is. I got a couple possibilities. It's going to be a good show, nonetheless. Why would you doubt that? For sure. Hey, if you have any feedback, you can send us an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. Or on Twitter or Instagram. The handle is @RealAgriculture. Or you can call the RealAg listener line. It is 855-776-6147. Don't miss out today on RealAg Radio on Rural Radio 147, 4:30 Eastern, 2:30 Mountain. We're going to hear today from Brendan Turner of Farm Lead on the markets, as well as we're going to hear from RI Canada, which is the ethanol lobby group in Canada, on this new clean fuel standard that the Liberals are proposing. Thank you very much, everybody, for getting real and getting connected with RealAg Live, and we'll chat again tomorrow. Cheers, everybody.